I spent 5 years of my life restoring a 1967 Mustang for my wife, pouring every weekend and every spare cent into that chassis, only to find out she was using the back seat to film content with another man. My name is Reed, and if you're sitting there thinking your life is stable, that the person sleeping next to you is who they say they are, I need you to listen closely. Today I'm going to tell you how I burned down a digital empire built on my own sweat and blood. But before I get into the grease and the grime of how it all fell apart, I want to know, have you ever felt like a ghost in your own home while your partner lived a double life online? Drop a yes in the comments if you've been through something similar, and let me know which city you're watching from. Your stories keep me grounded. Living in Detroit, you learn that things of value aren't bought, they're built. They are forged in heat and sustained with constant backbreaking maintenance. That was my philosophy for my marriage to Jade. When we first met, she was a nurse, compassionate, tired, and real. I loved the way she looked in scrubs exhausted after a 12-hour shift, sharing a greasy burger with me in the cab of my truck. We were a team. I was the guy with grease under his fingernails, the one who could hear a misfire from BA 3 blocks away, and she was the one who kept my heart beating in sync. I worked 60 hours a week in my restoration shop, breathing in paint fumes and metal shavings, all so we could have that white picket fence dream in the suburbs. We weren't rich, but we were solid, or so I thought. But dreams change, or rather they get replaced by screens. About 2 years ago, Jade decided she was done with the hospital. She said the trauma of the ER was too much, that she needed to find her light and align with her true purpose. I supported her without a second thought. I told her to take the time she needed, that I'd pick up extra shifts at the shop to cover the mortgage. That's when the transition began. Slowly, the scrubs were traded for designer labels I couldn't pronounce. The messy bun she used to wear was replaced by professional blowouts that cost more than a set of high-performance tires. She rebranded herself as a luxury travel and fashion blogger. At first, I was proud. I saw her gaining followers, saw her smiling more at the camera. I thought, this is it. This is her happiness. I didn't mind that our dinner table became a film set. I didn't mind that I had to wait 20 minutes to eat my steak, because she needed the perfect top-down shot for her aesthetic. I was the provider. I was the silent engine under the hood keeping the car moving while she polished the chrome. But then the polish started to feel abrasive. Jade began to change the way she looked at me. It wasn't just that I was dirty from the shop. It was as if my very existence was a blemish on the brand she was building. She stopped posting photos of us together. When I asked why she'd give me that look, the one that makes you feel like an idiot, like you're a child asking a stupid question. "Reed, it's about the grid," she'd say, scrolling past me without looking up. "Your rugged look is great for the shop, but it doesn't fit the high-end global citizen vibe I'm going for. It confuses the algorithm. My followers want to see a certain lifestyle and, well, oil stains aren't part of that." I was a confusion to the algorithm. Not her husband. Not the man who paid for the ring on her finger or the $2,000 lens she used to take selfies. I started feeling like a background character in a movie I was financing. I would come home after a grueling day, my back aching from leaning over an engine block for 10 hours, and I'd find her in the living room dressed in a $3,000 gown I'd bio-geo seen before talking to a tripod. She'd look at me with genuine annoyance, as if my heavy boots on the hardwood floor were a personal insult to her digital space. "Can you just stay in the kitchen for a bit?" she'd whisper-shout while the red light was on. "I'm filming my day in the life of a self-made woman segment, and I can't have you clanking around in the background." The irony was a bitter pill, but I swallowed it because I loved her. I thought it was just a phase of her career, the hustle everyone talks about these days. I focused all my energy on the Mustang. It was a 1967 fastback, a total wreck when I found it in a barn near Lansing. It was rusted through, the engine was seized, and the interior smelled like 40 years of neglect and rotted hay. It was my masterpiece, I told her it was hers, a symbol of our journey, something old and broken made beautiful again. I spent nights researching the exact shade of Highland green. I hand-stitched the leather seats until my fingers bled. Every time I tightened a bolt, I felt like I was tightening the bond of our marriage. I thought that once it was finished, once we went for that first drive down Lakeshore Drive with the windows down and the V8 roaring, we'd find our way back to each other. But the more I built, the more she drifted. She started talking about Troy Vance. She mentioned him casually at first, a mentor she met in a digital marketing group. He's a genius, Reed. He owns half of Miami and his YouTube channel is pure gold. He's teaching me how to scale my reach and monetize my influence. I saw Troy's face on her phone more than I saw her looking at me. He was everything I wasn't. He was tanned, he wore linen shirts unbuttoned to his navel, and he spent his days leaning against Ferraris he probably didn't own talking about manifesting your inner billionaire. To me, he looked like a snake oil salesman with a veneers and a bad spray tan. To Jade, he was a god. She started taking business trips to Florida. Networking events, she called them, masterminds. I'd drop her off at the airport, watching her walk away in her designer heels with a suitcase full of clothes I'd paid for, and I'd go back to the shop covered in dust. Working on a car she'd eventually use as a prop for her success stories. I felt a hollow gnawing ache in my chest, a low-level vibration like a faulty transmission you know is about to blow. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that Detroit men didn't get jealous. They got to work. I convinced myself that she was just ambitious and that Troy was just a tool for her success. I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. The atmosphere in our house turned frigid. Jade was physically there, but her mind was in Miami in the comments section in the world of likes and shares. She began to talk down to me, mocking my small-town values. She'd laugh at the way I saved money for boring stuff, like taxes and insurance. Troy says that money is energy. She told me one night, her eyes glowing with a fervor I hadn't seen since our wedding day. He says if you don't spend it like a king, you'll never attract the wealth of a king. You're too stuck in the scarcity mindset, Reed. It's holding me back. I looked at my hands, calloused, stained with charcoal and oil, and then at her pristine, manicured fingers. I realized we weren't even speaking the same language anymore. My language was made of torque steel and sweat. Hers was made of filters, hashtags, and empty promises from a man who lived behind a ring light. The Mustang was nearing completion. It was the only thing keeping me sane. I had rebuilt the engine from the ground up, bored it out, and tuned it until it purred with a deep, menacing rumble. I spent 3 weeks just on the paint job sanding between every coat until the green was so deep you felt like you could fall into it. It was a car meant for a queen, but as I stood back to look at it, I realized I didn't even know the woman I was giving it to. One evening, about 3 weeks ago, I stayed late at the shop to finish the wiring on the Mustang's dashboard. The silence of the garage was usually my sanctuary, the only place where the world made sense. But that night, the air felt heavy, charged with a static I couldn't explain. I walked over to the car, running my hand over the cold, smooth metal of the fender. It was perfect. The chrome caught the overhead fluorescent light, gleaming with a predatory intensity that seemed to mock my own exhaustion. I sat in the driver's seat, breathing in the scent of new leather and the faint, sweet smell of gasoline. I reached into the glove box to place the finalized registration papers inside. I had put the title in her name as a surprise, but my hand brushed against something cold and plastic tucked deep in the shadows of the compartment. I pulled it out my heart, doing a strange, jerky dance against my ribs. It was a small black GoPro camera, one of the high-end models I'd bought her for her travel vlogs. I didn't remember her using it in the shop. In fact, she'd complained that the lighting in my garage was trash for content. Why would it be hidden here? My thumb brushed the power button and the small screen flickered to life, casting a ghostly blue glow on my face. I hesitated. There is a terrifying moment before you know the definitive truth where you can still pretend everything is okay. You can tell yourself a lie and almost believe it. Once you press play, the world shifts. You can never go back to being the man you were 5 minutes ago. My thumb hovered over the playback button, the air in the shop suddenly feeling too thin to breathe. I looked around at my tools, my workbench, the life I had built with my hands, and for the first time, it all felt like a fragile stage set, waiting to be knocked over. I finally pressed the button, the mechanical click sounding like a gunshot in the silent, cavernous garage, and I watched the screen as the playback started, my eyes fixed on the grain of the leather seats I had hand-stitched with so much hope. The flickering blue light from that tiny screen felt like a laser cutting through my retinas. I sat there paralyzed in the driver's seat of the Mustang, the very seat I had painstakingly bolted down just 48 hours prior, watching a high-definition nightmare unfold. The video wasn't a travel vlog or a fashion haul. It was a raw, unfiltered look at a betrayal that made the oil stains on my floor look clean. The camera had been positioned on the dashboard, angled toward the rear, capturing Jade and a man I recognized instantly from the linen shirt and the smug porcelain white smile, Troy Vance. They weren't talking about manifesting wealth or scaling reach. They were laughing. They were laughing at me. "He's literally in the shop right now, Jade." Troy's voice came through the small speakers, tinny but unmistakable. He was leaning back against the leather I had hand-stitched his sweaty palms, leaving marks on the pristine surface. "Doesn't it bother you? The guy is downstairs working like a dog while we're up here using his masterpiece as a backdrop for my alpha lifestyle course." Jade didn't flinch. She didn't defend the man who had paid for her lifestyle. Instead, she leaned into him, her face lit by the same artificial glow she used for her selfies. "Reed doesn't see anything unless it has a carburetor, Troy. He's a relic. He thinks hard work is the point of life. He has no idea that his hard work is just the fuel for our fire." She then looked directly into the lens, checking her hair, and whispered, "Besides, the vintage aesthetic of this car is going to get us millions of views. It's the perfect rich girl vibe. He's just the mechanic who keeps the props running." I felt a roar in my ears that was louder than any engine I'd ever built. It was the sound of my world collapsing in real time. I watched 10 more minutes of footage clips of them scouting locations, discussing how to funnel more money from our joint savings into Troy's investment funds, and even planning a charity event where they would use my Mustang as the grand prize to lure in high-ticket donors for a scam. My hands, usually so steady with a wrench, were shaking so violently I almost dropped the GoPro. I didn't storm into the house. I didn't scream. That's what a man in a scarcity mindset would do, according to Troy. No, I sat in the darkness of my shop for 3 hours, the smell of Highland green paint and betrayal thick in the air. I realized then that Jade wasn't just drifting. She had been hijacked. Or maybe she was the hijacker all along and I was just the cargo. The next morning I woke up before the sun, but I didn't go to the shop. I sat at the kitchen island watching Jade sleep through the cracked bedroom door. She looked so peaceful, so on brand. I went to our shared computer, the one I had bought her for editing, and decided to do some digging of my own. I wasn't looking for photos anymore. I was looking for the paper trail. I found a hidden folder labeled Retreat Expenses. It wasn't travel receipts for hotels. It was a ledger of deceit. Over the last 8 months, Jade hadn't just been investing in herself. She had been siphoning off my business account $5,000 here, $12,000 there, disguised as equipment maintenance or material sourcing. It was all going to a shell company called Storm Media, registered to an address in Miami that turned out to be a P.O. box. She was bankrolling Troy's lifestyle, the VIP tables, the rented Ferraris, the private jets, all with the money I earned by grinding rust off old steel until my lungs burned. I felt a strange, cold clarity wash over me. It was the same feeling I get when I find the exact source of a catastrophic engine failure. You don't get angry at the broken piston. You figure out how to replace the whole block. I reached out to my cousin Cora. She's a sharp-as-nails attorney who specializes in forensic accounting. We met at a nondescript diner on the edge of town. I didn't tell her I was heartbroken. I told her I was being robbed. When I showed her the GoPro footage and the bank statements, her face turned to stone. "Read," she whispered, sliding the papers back to me. "This isn't just an affair. This is systematic embezzlement of marital assets. She's not just leaving you, she's stripping the ship before it sinks." Cora helped me set up a digital tripwire. If Jade or Troy tried to move another cent, I'd know. But I needed more. I needed to know exactly what Troy was planning for his big awakening event in Miami. I spent the next few days playing the part of the oblivious, oil-stained husband. I'd come home, kiss Jade on the cheek, and listen to her talk about her evolving energy. It was sickening. Every time she touched me, I felt like I was being touched by a stranger who had already cleaned out my pockets. One night I caught her on a hushed phone call on the patio. I stood by the back door, the shadows of the hallway swallowing me whole. "It's almost ready, Troy," she hissed into the phone, her voice vibrating with an excitement she never showed me. "The title is in my name. Once we launch the live stream on Friday, we announce the giveaway. We'll have 100,000 sign-ups at $50 a pop. That's 5 million, Troy. We can be in Ibiza by Monday. Reed, he'll be fine. He'll just go back to his garage and find another car to fix. It's what he does." She laughed, that same cold, digital laugh from the GoPro. I stood there, my heart turning into a block of ice. They weren't just stealing my money. They were going to use my masterpiece, my 5 years of soul-crushing labor, as the bait for a massive fraud. They were going to sell my Mustang to a crowd of hopeful marks and disappear with the cash. I didn't confront her. I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I went back to the shop and pulled up a stool in front of my monitors. "I'm an old-school mechanic, sure, but you don't build high-end resto mods without learning a thing or two about onboard computers and digital security." I started looking into the platform Troy was using for his awakening live stream. It was a third-party site with flashy graphics and pathetic security, exactly the kind of thing a shortcut taker like Troy would use. I spent the rest of the week in a trance of cold, calculated preparation. I wasn't just a mechanic anymore, I was a saboteur. I worked on the Mustang, but not to make it prettier. I installed a few upgrades that Jade wouldn't find in any lifestyle magazine. I felt a grim satisfaction with every wire I soldered, every line of code I verified. On Thursday night, the house was quiet. Jade was packing her bags for Miami, humming a tune I didn't recognize. She came into the shop one last time to say goodbye to the car, or rather to check her prop. She ran a hand over the Highland green hood, her eyes reflecting the overhead lights like cold glass. "It really is beautiful, Reed," she said, not looking at me. "You outdid yourself this time. It's a shame you're so tied to this place. You could have been someone." I stood by the workbench, wiping a wrench with a rag, watching her walk toward the house. She didn't look back. She didn't see the way I was looking at the Mustang, or the way my fingers were hovering over the upload button on my laptop. I waited until her bedroom light went out. Then I turned back to the screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat in the dark, waiting for me to initiate the final sequence of the recovery. The cursor on my screen was a rhythmic, agonizing heartbeat in the midnight gloom of the garage. For years, my hands had been dedicated to the tangible, the heavy torque of a wrench, the grit of sandpaper, the visceral heat of a welding torch. But tonight, my tools were invisible. They were lines of data and backdoors into a world that had tried to bury me. I stared at the initiate button on my dashboard, feeling the weight of the betrayal pressing down on my lungs like a collapsed car jack. Every dollar Jade had drained from our life was a ghost in the room whispering that I was a fool. But even a fool learns how to fix a broken machine if you give him enough time in the dark. Friday arrived with a heavy, humid tension that clung to the air in Detroit. Jade was a whirlwind of practiced elegance, her suitcase filled with silk and lies. She gave me a distracted peck on the cheek, her eyes already fixed on the Uber waiting at the curb. "I'll call you when the event is over, Reed. Wish me luck, this could change our lives." She chirped, her voice as hollow as a rusted-out muffler. I watched her go, not with the sadness of a husband losing his wife, but with the cold focus of a hunter watching his prey enter the brush. She had no idea that I had spent the previous night not just on my laptop, but under the chassis of the Mustang she was so eager to give away. The Awakening event was being broadcast from a glass-walled studio in Miami, a temple of vanity built on high-speed internet and desperate dreams. I set up my command center in the shop, surrounded by the smell of oil and the hum of 3 monitors. I had Cora on a private line, her voice a steady anchor in my ear. "The financial injunctions are ready, Reed. The moment you pull the trigger, every account linked to Storm Media freezes. We just need the public admission." On the main screen, Troy Vance appeared. He looked like a plastic god under the studio lights, his teeth too white, his skin a shade of orange that didn't exist in nature. He paced the stage with a wireless mic, his voice booming with a confidence that only a con man can maintain. "Wealth is a choice," he roared to the digital crowd of 50,000 paying viewers. "And today we're rewarding one lucky visionary with a symbol of ultimate freedom, the Highland Queen Mustang, a one-of-a-kind masterpiece. Gifted to us by a woman who chose to leave her old stagnant life behind to join the ranks of the elite. Jade, come out here." Jade walked onto the stage looking radiant in a dress that probably cost more than my first truck. She stood next to Troy, her hand resting on a massive digital display showing the Mustang. She started her speech talking about reclaiming her power and breaking free from the shackles of a low-frequency existence. She spoke about me without saying my name, painting a picture of a dull, stagnant man who tried to dim her light. I sat in my shop, my jaw tight, watching her sell our history to a crowd of strangers for $50 a ticket. Now, Troy grinned, leaning into the camera. "Before we draw the winner of this $500,000 machine, I want to show you the reality of success. Jade, tell them about the investment." This was the moment. Jade began to explain how her generous contribution from her personal business funds was the cornerstone of Troy's new offshore crypto fund. She was giddy, practically glowing as she talked about the millions they were going to make. She was so caught up in the performance that she didn't notice the slight flicker in the studio's monitor behind her. I leaned forward, my fingers dancing across the mechanical keyboard. I had spent days finding the weak point in their streaming software, a simple, unpatched vulnerability in the guest user portal. I wasn't just hacking a stream, I was hijacking a narrative. "Cora, we're live in 543. I hit the command. The glitzy Awakening graphics on the live stream didn't just glitch, they dissolved. 1 second. Troy was pointing to a digital rendering of the Mustang. The next, the entire background screen behind him turned a stark, clinical white. A massive PDF file appeared on the screen, scrolling slowly enough for every viewer to read. It was the first bank statement. $12,000. Schaumausers Arbeittrainbein say, Ransfee, Cal Bansford from Reed's Restoration and Custom Shop to Storm Media, Miami. Troy's smile faltered. He looked back at the screen, his brow furrowing. We seem to have a little technical hiccup here, folks. Just part of the energy of the room. But I wasn't done. I cut the studio's audio and replaced it with the file I had pulled from the GoPro. The speakers in the Miami studio and on 50,000 devices across the country exploded with Jade's own voice, crystal clear and chillingly cold. "Reed doesn't see anything unless it has a carburetor, Troy. He's a relic. He's just the mechanic who keeps the props running." The silence in the Miami studio was so profound, I could almost hear the sweat beads forming on Troy's forehead. Jade stood frozen, her hand still resting on the display, her face going from radiant to ghostly in a matter of seconds. I watched her eyes dart to the camera, realizing that the self-made woman mask had just been ripped off in front of her entire world. I switched the feed again. Now the screen showed a split view: on the left, Troy Vance's luxury lifestyle posts, the Ferraris, the watches, the villas. On the right, the corresponding bank withdrawals from my business account that paid for every single one of them. The crypto king was being unmasked as a parasite, and his queen was the one who had provided the blood. "Read, look at the comment section," Cora whispered in my ear. It was a bloodbath. The manifesting fans had turned into a digital lynch mob in seconds. "Where is the money, Troy? Is this guy a fraud, Jade? How could you do that to your husband?" The numbers were dropping not by the hundreds, but by the thousands. I took the final step. I activated the remote access camera I had installed in the Mustang's dashboard, the one Jade didn't know about. I didn't show my face. I just pointed the lens at the title and registration papers sitting on my workbench. I had signed them over to a local charity for veterans 30 minutes ago. The car was never hers to give away. I watched Troy grab Jade's arm, his face contorted in a mask of rage that wasn't on brand at all. He started shouting at the camera, trying to kill the feed, but I had locked them out of their own system. I felt a grim, cold satisfaction as I watched them scramble in that glass-walled cage, two beautiful predators who had finally run out of room to hide. I reached out and slowly lowered the master fader on my soundboard, the studio noise fading into a static hiss, leaving them gesturing wildly in a silence of their own making. The static hiss on my monitors felt like the only honest sound left in the world. I sat back in my worn leather chair, the glow of the screens reflecting off the very wrenches and ratchets that had built the Highland Queen. For a second, I just breathed. The silence in my shop was a stark contrast to the digital hurricane I had just unleashed upon Miami. I reached out and tapped the keyboard one last time, cutting the feed entirely and watching the screens go black. It was over. The empire of glass and lies had shattered and the shards were still falling. But before I tell you what happened when the dust finally settled, I have to ask, was I too cold? Or was this the only way to get justice? I want to read your honest thoughts below. Did the punishment fit the crime? Or did I go too far? The fallout was more explosive than even Cora had predicted. Within 24 hours, Troy Vance wasn't just canceled. He was under federal investigation. It turns out that when you broadcast evidence of marital embezzlement to 50,000 people, the IRS and the SEC tend to take notice. His crypto king lifestyle evaporated like steam on a hot manifold. The rented Ferraris were towed, the Miami studio was padlocked, and the man who once preached about manifesting greatness was last seen dodging reporters outside a public defender's office. He didn't have a scarcity mindset anymore. He just had nothing. Jade's downfall was different. It was quiet, and in many ways more brutal. She didn't come home. She couldn't. The community she had built, the followers she had curated so carefully, turned on her with a ferocity that only the internet can summon. Every brand deal she had labored to secure vanished by Monday morning. She was no longer an influencer. She was a cautionary tale, a meme about greed and the dangers of forgetting where you came from. She sent me a flurry of texts that night, ranging from hysterical apologies to venomous accusations, but I didn't read them. I didn't need to. I had already heard everything she had to say on that GoPro recording. The legal process moved with the cold, grinding precision of a well-oiled machine. With Cora leading the charge, the divorce was finalized in record time. Because Jade had used marital assets to fund a third party's lifestyle under false pretenses, the judge wasn't lenient. She was ordered to repay every cent she had siphoned from the business. She ended up losing the house, her luxury wardrobe, and every piece of equipment I had once bought to support her dream. She moved back to her hometown to live in a small apartment, far away from the high-frequency lifestyle she had traded her soul for. As for the Mustang, I didn't keep it. I couldn't look at those Highland green curves without seeing the ghosts of her betrayal. The veterans' charity I donated it to auctioned it off for nearly $600,000. Every penny went to building housing for homeless vets right here in Detroit. Watching that car drive away on a transport trailer was the lightest I had felt in years. I realized that the masterpiece wasn't the car itself. It was the fact that I could build something that actually changed lives for the better rather than just fueling a lie. I'm still in the shop. The smell of oil and old steel is still my sanctuary, but the air feels cleaner now. I've started a new project, a 1950s pickup for a local farmer, and I find myself enjoying the work more than I ever have. I don't work 60 hours a week anymore. I take time to walk by the river to talk to my neighbors and to remember what it feels like to be a man who isn't just a provider, but a person. I learned that you can't fix a broken person the way you fix a broken engine. Sometimes the parts are just too worn down, the core too cracked. You have to let the wreckage go to save yourself. Yay! There are two ways people look at what I did. Some of you might think I was a villain for humiliating her so publicly, for burning her world down on a global stage. Others see it as poetic justice, the only way to hold someone accountable in an age where everything is a performance. I'm curious where you stand. Was this a masterpiece of revenge or a mistake I'll eventually regret? Drop a comment and let's talk about it. Life in Detroit is moving on. The rust is gone, the engine is tuned, and for the first time in my life, I'm not looking in the rearview mirror. I'm looking straight ahead at the open road. If you've ever been betrayed, just know this: the rebuild is always better than the original. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, hit that subscribe button. It means the world to me as I keep rebuilding not just cars, but my life. I'll see you in the next one.